but I don't know what to say. When someone you care about is grieving, sometimes it is very hard to figure out what the right thing to do or say might be. The truth of the matter is, showing up for somebody is really important. Even in just very small ways, you can make a difference in their lives, help them get through this grief. Today I'm going to be sharing 5 observations that I have that could be an option for you next time you find yourself wondering, what do I say? Hey there, I'm Kelly. I am a 60-something-year-old Jersey girl. And before we go any further, I have to say my disclaimer. I am not a doctor or a therapist, a life coach, a guru, none of that. I am just someone just like you who has to deal with these crazy curveballs that life decides to throw our way, especially as we get older. I'm just here to share my thoughts and stimulate a conversation. Brainflower is a place I created that's full of optimism and hope and maybe a few laughs for us Gen Xers and beyond. By now I have gone to too many funerals, including my own family's. And I realized something. People feel very uncomfortable and really don't know how to support you, the grieving person. It's not because they don't want to, because I think that most often people do. But they themselves are so swept away by the emotion of the experience or just feeling very uncomfortable about death, they just don't know what to do. And it can be very awkward for them to say or do the right things without sort of stepping on your toes or hurting your feelings. And that's why I think people honestly say, I don't know what to say. Or maybe they fall back on like greeting card stuff. I'm so sorry for your loss. Or may they rest in peace. And I guess if you don't really know the deceased very well, that could suffice and be acceptable. But if you do, it might come across as a little shallow and not personal. I want to start out with a please don't do this. And that's please don't offer unsolicited advice. People mean well when they say things like, they've gone to a better place. That could seem very shallow and hurtful to the person who is grieving, even though you don't mean it to come across that way. When my mom died, somebody said to my father, God must have needed another angel. He went ballistic. God has millions of angels. Why does he need my wife? I need my wife. Except my dad didn't actually say it that way. He said it like a guy who loaded trucks full of beef for a living. It wasn't pretty. He was very, very upset. My dad is a deeply religious person, and this bothered him for weeks. He asked every priest, every nun, why God needed his wife to be an angel. So even though you're trying to say something nice, in a moment of grief, a person may misinterpret that and leave them feeling a way that you did not intend them to feel. 2, check in with the person, but also check in with them later. You know, grief just doesn't get all wrapped up after the funeral or after the graveside ceremony. Grief lingers. After my brother died, one of the most meaningful things somebody did for me weeks later, I think even months later, was I heard from a high school friend. And I hadn't talked to her in quite some time, but about 6 months after my brother died, she sent me the loveliest letter. She was a relatively new widow, and she commented on how she held back knowing that I was going to be surrounded by so many people in the immediate aftermath of my brother's death. She remembered how difficult it was for her after that initial swell of sympathy kind of dissipated and she was left on her own. So she wanted to reach out to me later on, knowing that I would probably be in the same boat. And I was. And it was, her note to me was coming from such a place of deep empathy and care. She knew my brother. We all grew up in the same small town. So it was a very personal letter. And I have to tell you, it was one of the kindest things somebody did for me while I was going through my grieving experience, which was recognizing that I still needed some kindness and support even months after the death itself. That is a wonderful and kind thing for you to do for someone you know who is going through a grief experience. Touch base with them a few months later, see how they're doing. It will really mean a lot. 3, share genuine memories of the person who is lost. I think people hesitate to do this, or they do it very generally, like, she was always such a happy person. But sharing true memories about them is a gift. At my father's funeral, some of the men that he had worked with came and they recognized me. I, first of all, looked just like my father. And they were telling me about how they marveled over my father's uncanny math skills, which we all knew about. But what I didn't know is that he would go to work early and men would come to him and talk to my dad about how many hours they had worked overtime, etc., etc. And my dad would help them figure out what their final paycheck would be. And this was a great source of comfort for these guys to be able to understand what their pay would be. And they really respected my dad for it. And it made me see him in a little bit of a different light. And that was a really great gift. After her death, so many people told me amazing stories about my sister. My sister was a very gregarious and outgoing person. And she managed to convince a coworker that they should say yes to every single event that they were invited to, including one that evening. And off they went. And at that dinner, her coworker met the love of her life and her future partner. And she says to me, I would never have met her if that didn't happen, if your sister didn't insist that we go out. And I love the fact that she played that little role in this woman's happiness. I still take great comfort in the fact knowing that even though many of my family members died very young, that they left their mark on other people, that they made a difference in this world, even though it was small. It wasn't small to them. The love that I have for them is even bigger once you hear those stories. It is a wonderful thing to do for a grieving soul, to tell them a positive and genuine story, and not just a little bit of a catchphrase like, they were a nice person. Give them the details. It will be meaningful. Be thoughtful about what you're doing. I'm from New Jersey, so after every death, I was drowning in lasagna and wine because that's what we do here. And even though I didn't really know what to do with all this food and drink, I recognized that it was the way people could invite themselves over and an excuse to ring my doorbell. And I was grateful for their company. My 5th and final observation is just do something. Don't ghost the grieving person. We don't understand why. It leaves us very confused and very upset. Without going into it, there were people who I really was counting on to be there for me, and they just sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. And was I angry about it? Yeah, I was really, really angry. To this day, years, many, many years later, I still haven't heard from them. I felt like I was processing the loss of my brother or sister, and now I have to process the loss of losing somebody who I considered a good friend. It was weird. And yeah, I was angry. And it took me a long time till I realized that, you know what? People deal with grief in their own way. And maybe for them, they just couldn't be face to face with me. And they were just too embarrassed to talk about it. I get that now. It makes it a little easier to deal with. Hopefully, some of this discussion clicked with you. I'm really grateful that you hung out with me today. Brainflower is still very new, and if I could ask you to subscribe, it would really help us continue on with conversations like this. Remember, I read all your comments. I can't wait to read them, actually. In the meantime, have a great day and go pick yourself some brain flowers.